As far as budget lenses go, this one must have one of the most passionate and dedicated followings out there. I can't tell you how many times I've had comments saying this is literally their favorite lens at any price point. So I bought one off Amazon and I'm trying to figure out what all the hype is about. Now, I think the low price plays a huge role in its popularity. I also think this lens has a near perfect combination of high quality build and handling, optical performance, and interesting character. It also looks exceptionally cool, something reminiscent of an old classic Zeiss lens. I'll put some links in the description down below where you can find the lens. I did find the pricing was variable, so I would check all the links and see which one is the best price in your area. This is the TTArtisan's 23mm f1.4 lens. And being a 23mm lens, it's a 35mm full frame field of view equivalent. This is generally considered the best all-purpose focal length for APS-C sensor cameras, which makes it excellent for a variety of different situations. And one of the first that comes to mind is street photography. The very popular Fujifilm X100 series is a camera that comes with a fixed 23mm lens, and it's an APS-C sensor camera. This is one of the hottest street photography cameras on the market right now. And even when you look at classic street photography, this field of view has been considered the standard going all the way back to the oldest film cameras. And most street photographers will have a lens with this field of view in their kit. Because this lens also has optical performance, which is kind of a blend between a modern lens and the character of a vintage lens, it gives your images kind of a unique look that you won't get out of most modern lenses or vintage lenses. The other thing this lens is going to be great for is as an all-purpose travel lens, whether you're traveling with friends or family, if you're in a busy city, or if you're in the great outdoors. The 23mm focal length is going to give you a reasonably wide field of view, which allows you to show the subject in the environment that they're in, but is not so wide that it will give you significant distortion of a person or their features, unless you get very close to them. And because it's an f1.4 lens, it's also going to be great in low light conditions. So while a fixed focal length lens lacks the flexibility of a zoom lens, it does compensate for that by allowing you to capture higher quality images in low light conditions. And while traveling, you have no control of the lighting or amount of light, and in most situations, this can be pretty important. The ultimate combination is to probably carry an all-purpose zoom lens and a fixed lens for low light conditions like this one. And because this lens is so small, you could even just put it in your pocket and pull it out when you need it for those low light conditions. This lens is also going to be a great video lens. 23mm gives you a wide enough field of view to have a subject fill a meaningful part of the frame, but it still allows that person to move around the space in the frame without having to chase them around with the camera. And for most camera systems, 23mm is also a very good focal length for in-body image stabilization or digital image stabilization, because it gives you a wide enough image that is easy for the camera to correct kind of the handshake in the image, but it's not so wide that you're going to get some weird warbling or wobbling effect in the corners. And of course, the f1.4 aperture is also going to be great for low light video. For me, if I could only have one focal length for video, it would be this 23mm APS-C or 35mm full frame field of view. And when I'm picking out cinema lenses, this is almost always the first focal length that I'm looking for. Now, I should mention there is one single disadvantage that I find to using a 23mm lens, and that's the fact that it produces a very standard looking image. This means it's not dramatically wide, it's not dramatically telephoto. It very much looks like what the naked eye would see. And for those that haven't quite mastered the art of image composition, this focal length is a great training tool. And if you can compose moving images with a 23mm lens, you can probably do so with any lens. But it also means that there's nowhere to hide, and this sort of lens isn't going to do you any favors in producing more interesting images when you lack the skill to compose that image. And I should say, while the focal length isn't going to do you any favors in creating a more interesting image, the image character that comes out of this lens, being kind of a blend of a modern lens and a vintage lens, can serve to make your images a little bit more interesting compared to other 23mm lenses. And even though this is a budget lens, the lens does not look or feel cheap by any means. You've got an all metal body, you've got a polished metal lens mount, you even have a really nice slide-on metal lens cap, which a lot of people like more than these new screw-on metal lens caps that a lot of TTArtisan lenses have right now. And I will say, I was a bit worried, is a cap like this going to fall off? But it hasn't. I've used it a lot and it just sticks on there really nicely, but it's still easy to take off. The focus ring is super smooth, well dampened, and easy to use. I had no trouble manually focusing or nailing focus. And it has a clicked aperture ring, which I really like, particularly for street photography applications, where I just want to lock that into an aperture. I know that's where it's at, and I'm not worried about easily bumping and moving it. So overall, like the user experience, this feels like a much more expensive vintage lens. And it comes on all the popular mirrorless lens mounts, including Sony E, Fuji X, Micro Four Thirds, Nikon Z, Canon RF, L mount, and Canon EFM. The lens does exhibit a moderate amount of barrel distortion. This is not something you're going to notice in most real-world situations, but if you are shooting a subject that does have straight lines close to the edge of frame, you're definitely going to notice it. This is fairly consistent, so it's quite easy to correct in Lightroom, but you are going to get a little bit of barrel distortion. Like most lenses that go to f1.4, you do get reasonably heavy vignette when it is shot wide open. Once again, something that's easy to correct in Lightroom, but this goes away pretty quickly. Even f2, f2.8, the vignette is reduced quite significantly. Looking at chromatic aberration, you do get a very minor amount of chromatic aberration in the in-focus areas. Now, this is so little that unless you are shooting a black and white test chart, I don't think you're going to pick it up, but if you do look for it, you will find it in some situations. And looking at longitudinal chromatic aberration, which is a change in color cast in the out of focus areas before and after the plane of focus, there is basically none that I could find whatsoever, which I was surprised because this is usually really a challenge for some of these budget lenses. When we look at flare performance, this is going to be either a deal maker or a deal breaker for some. And I think it is one of the optical characters that people absolutely love about this lens. And that is that you are going to get interesting and artistic and exciting sort of lens flare. Now, if you're the type of person that thinks any lens flare is bad lens flare, then this is not the lens for you. But if you're the type of person who likes to bring on interesting lens flare in situations to add to the type of image that you're creating, I think you will really like this lens. Interestingly, it has this concave front element, and I don't know if this is part of it or not. I find lenses with concave front elements seem to have very interesting lens flares, and this one is no exception. Looking at close-up image quality, the close-up image quality is great. It gets better as you stop it down, but it does have a reasonably good minimum focus distance, and that minimum focus distance, the image is very sharp and detailed. Now, looking at the sharpness overall, this is something that a lot of these budget lenses sort of suffer from. And when I compare this lens to some of these other, I've got a number of 25mm lenses that are about $60 or $70. This one's about like $30 or $40 more. But I think if we look at the sharpness and detail in the center of frame wide open, this one goes to f1.4, and I would say it is sharper than the other budget lens options. And I think as far as sharpness goes, it is very, very good. I have seen some reports that you kind of have a sharp center, and as you get to mid-frame, it gets a little bit softer, and then you get to the edges, it gets a little sharper, and then in the corners, it's a little bit softer. Now, in all real-world shooting and testing that I've done, this may be happening, but it is really, you cannot tell because the image quality just looks fine. If you do shoot test charts, I don't doubt that you might find this optical performance, but in real world results, the image just looks sharp, wide open, right from f1.4. And probably one of the single best qualities of this lens is the quality of its bokeh and background blur, which is just pleasing and smooth and dreamy. And it really draws the viewer's eye to what is sharp and detailed in the center of frame and allows that background to just melt away. And I think if I just rate the background blur on its own out of this lens, we're probably somewhere around a 9 out of 10. It is just excellent. So why is this lens so loved in the budget photography community? I think this is this combination of a modern lens sharpness, vintage lens character, and this ultra cool lens design that makes it so popular. The images coming out of the lens are interesting, punchy, and have just enough contrast, and the background blur is smooth and pleasing. And the experience of using this lens is like using a very high quality vintage lens, but at a fraction of the price and without the hassles that you often get in messing around with vintage lenses. If you're an APS-C shooter and you've been wondering, do I need to upgrade to full frame to get the best quality images? I've just shown a video on screen now. I think for most APS-C shooters out there, this lens will eliminate the need to upgrade to full frame.